Hey, I just wanted to make this video on some of the things Kyle Kulinski has said recently. I've alluded to it before, but I think Kyle Kulinski is one of the more tolerable left-wing pundits out there. If you're on the right side of the political spectrum, and you wanted to diversify the perspectives you consume by listening to opposing views, which I recommend you do, Kyle Kulinski would be a good fit. That's not to say he's immune from misguided or outright dumb opinions. For context, Kyle is reacting to a clip from Jon Stewart as he interviews Attorney General Leslie Rutledge. The conversation is about trans issues. Now, I won't be too focused on the original Jon Stewart clip, but Kyle's reaction, which I think is far more interesting.
Here to break it down a little bit for everybody, like the different positions that are on the menu. So Jon Stewart is taking the position that when it comes to trans healthcare, for adults and for the youth, effectively, like, leave it up to the experts. Leave it up to the scientists and the doctors and the people who've studied this and the families and the individuals.
Well, how can you argue with that? Jon Stewart, representing the left, is just following the experts. If you disagree, you're anti-science, you're anti-expert. I'll explain why I think this is nonsense later on, after Kyle has fleshed out his argument. But I just wanted to point out the guile of his framing of the left's opinion.
Like, sort of let them decide on their own, stop intervening.
Let's see if he's consistent with that.
The position of apparently the state of Arkansas is, no, we're effectively going to ban it for youth up to, until a certain line, and then after that you can get healthcare if you want. Now, by the way, there are plenty of people on the right, like Matt Walsh, for example, who go further and say, even ban transitioning for adults.
I don't know if that is indeed Matt Walsh's position, but if it was, I would side with Kyle here. I think adults should be able to do whatever they want, as long as they're not harming others.
I'm going to try to steelman the right's argument for a second.
Okay, Kyle, explain to us the right's position on trans issues.
So they say, look, for kids, there's this thing that's like a social contagion, which is it becomes like a fad. It becomes popular to try to be trans. And since that's the case, you're going to get like false positives where people are following the fad, the trend. They want to be trans, and they end up doing things that are like irreversible. And so, that's why you effectively want to ban it for young people, or at least wait until a certain line for them to decide.
Wow. Great steel manning, Kyle. While it's important whether there's an element of social contagion, that isn't the reason why kids shouldn't transition. Kids shouldn't transition because they're fucking kids, Kyle. If kids thought smoking was cool, that would be a problem, because more kids might smoke. But if the kids didn't think smoking was cool, if it wasn't trendy, they still shouldn't be allowed to do it. Whether or not there's a fad/social contagion element to the trans issue has no bearing on whether kids should or shouldn't do it. It will exacerbate something that's already an issue by making it more frequent. So that's a terrible attempt at steel manning. And Kyle will make the correct argument later on. So this is just bizarre.
What happens in terms of the healthcare that trans people can get when they're young? So they don't do bottom surgery for kids. They don't do it. What they will do in some instances is top surgery, but that's for, like 14, 15, 16, I guess, in that range.
Oh, okay, so top surgery, aka slicing up 14, 15, 16-year-olds is perfectly normal. I misunderstood. We're talking about surgery for children, Kyle. How can you say that so casually?
My understanding is it's not just banning, like, bottom surgery, which again doesn't happen. It's saying you can't even use puberty blockers, even if it's agreed upon by experts, and you can't use hormones. Now, by the way, the puberty blockers are effectively 100% reversible. They're effectively 100% reversible. The hormones are not necessarily 100% reversible, because you're still going to have, like, if you're female to male transition and you get, a bunch of testosterone, it might permanently alter hair follicles, bone density, jawline, things of that nature, right?
Oh, just permanently altering their body. Yeah, sure, that's just kid stuff. That's just normal kid stuff.
But that's really the realm of what we're talking about here. And there is like some debate from within the expert community. Hey, what should be allowed? What shouldn't be allowed? What should the waiting period be? Etc. In terms of when you're dealing with trans youth.
Okay, so now you're admitting there isn't a unanimous expert opinion on this exact topic that we're discussing. I don't know if it's unintentional or not, but Kyle's language and his presentation of these arguments is very sly. I actually think, by what I'm about to present later, that he's trying to justify it to himself.
But again, the position from the right is like just ban like any and all treatment for kids under a certain line. Whereas the position from what appears like Jon Stewart's position and the left's position more generally is like effectively leave it up to the individuals, the families, and the experts. And again, I want to reiterate, when you do leave it up to the individuals, the families, and the experts, they say they don't really do bottom surgery, but the extent that they will do any sort of intervention, it's puberty blockers and hormones to, effectively, with the puberty blockers, it's almost like to buy more time for the person to determine if this is really what they want, right? Okay, so now having said that, let's continue.
Finally, Kyle makes a coherent argument. And I do agree, if something is completely reversible, like puberty blockers, it should be left up to the parents and the quote-unquote experts. But when it comes to irreversible treatment and children, I would be more hesitant to leave it up to experts and parents. The reason being, as you've just admitted, is that the experts aren't in agreement as to what children should be allowed to do. And this isn't just a medical question, it's also a moral question. And when we don't know the full effects of something, we usually err on the side of caution.
Look, I understand the right's concern in the sense that they're like, you can't leave such a profound decision about the rest of your life up to a 7-year-old, right? Like, I understand that concern. I don't think that concern is crazy at all. But particularly when it comes to trans issues, there is a paradox there. And the paradox is, if we're dealing with somebody who has gender dysphoria, and they're born biologically male, they feel female, then they go through puberty and go from a boy to a man, they get a bunch of facial hair, they get a chiseled jaw, they get a manly bone structure, right? Well, then you just made it like 10 times worse.
If I'm understanding correctly, Kyle's making an argument for puberty blockers, which are completely reversible, so I don't think are much of an issue.
Again, I'm sure that within that expert community, they do have some lines as to like, I ain't doing, nothing's getting done. I'm not giving puberty blockers. I'm not giving hormones to a fucking 5-year-old, right?
I love how Kyle's just pretending that the experts are just one monolithic entity.
But when you talk about dealing with experts on this, and you're in the 14-year-old range, 15-year-old range, in an instance like that, what's the right thing to do? Should you just have a broad rule of like, no, you cannot make this decision until you're older? Or do you have a more like case-by-case approach to determine what makes sense and what doesn't make sense and adjust based on the evidence in the individual cases?
It depends on what we're talking about. Kyle conveniently lumps in reversible treatments with irreversible ones to make his argument more palatable.
I guess the debate... the debate boils down to a few things, but one of the things that's like at the crux of the debate is, to what extent do you think this social contagion idea is real? So that's the right's main contention. Again,
I don't think that's true at all. That exacerbates the issue, but it's not the issue. It's an important question of the issue, but it isn't the issue.
If being trans has become a fad, it's become the in thing, it's become popular, then are you going to let kids sort of ruin their bodies and do stuff that they'll wish they didn't do, and they'll look back on it like, what the fuck was I thinking? That's the question, is to what extent do you think there actually is a social contagion around being trans? And my instinct on that...
Okay, so an instinct implies you don't actually know. You're willing to cut up children on something that's just a feeling.
Has always been that there isn't much of a social contagion, because I don't think people approach stuff like this willy-nilly. I don't think doing medical interventions to change your gender are something that somebody would like casually do. I think that in most instances, the people who go down that path are people who are dealing with genuine dysphoria.
Yes, and that's why no one has had a regretful tattoo, because these things are always well thought out. Crazier things have happened than someone hearing about an illness or a disease and think they might have it. In fact, it's pretty common. How can you say it's not possible when Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy are known disorders?
They don't do bottom surgery for kids. So now, by the way, if they did, I would pump the brakes and I'd be like, I don't know about that, man. I don't know if that's the best path of action. We can't say for every other thing you need to be a certain age in order to be old enough to make the decision. But for this major decision, you do need to, right? Like that would be extreme. We can't say for every other thing you need to be a certain age in order to be old enough to make the decision. But for this major decision, you do need to, right? Like that would be extreme. That would be extreme.
So Kyle's argument completely falls apart here. Why are you drawing the line at bottom surgery? Is top surgery not a life-altering decision? Is that not extreme, Kyle? So for some reason, the rules don't apply for bottom surgery. That's too extreme. Children shouldn't make that decision. But I thought we should leave it to the individual cases. Let the parents decide. Let the experts decide. What happened to all that, Kyle? Kyle's made this arbitrary line of what's permissible and what's not permissible, but he makes no justification of why bottom surgery is not okay and why top surgery is okay, because they're both not okay. Let me play those two clips together to show what a hypocrite Kyle is.
They don't do bottom surgery for kids. They don't do it. What they will do in some instances is top surgery, but that's for, like 14, 15, 16, I guess, in that range. We can't say for every other thing you need to be a certain age in order to be old enough to make the decision. But for this major decision, you do need to, right? Like that would be extreme.
So I would love for Kyle to tell me why top surgery isn't a major decision.
But if you're talking about not doing bottom surgery for kids, but doing basically minor medical interventions in certain vetted circumstances.
Look at the language he uses to justify it to himself. Bottom surgery is too extreme, but a double mastectomy is just basically minor surgery. Just to note, I've been cutting and chopping and leaving out parts of Kyle's clip, but there's nowhere where he gives justification for the difference between top surgery and bottom surgery. Why is one okay and the other isn't?